Leighton Ford Ministries exists to be a catalyst for mentoring a new generation of healthy leaders who sustain thriving ministries for the sake of the gospel. We want to be a catalyst. We don't need to own it. We want to see other ministries and churches launch mentoring within their own spheres. We want to raise up a new generation of healthy leaders. Just this month, we were privileged to help sponsor a new mentoring community of women who are primarily focused on prison ministry and issues surrounding human trafficking. A few months ago, we were approached by a large endowment asking us to apply for a grant, a very large grant, to help raise up a new generation of mentoring leaders for pastors, especially in communities of color and church planters and small churches throughout the United States. We hope to have over 300 pastors who are involved in this new grant that we're applying for. A new generation of healthy leaders who sustain thriving ministries, all for the sake of the gospel. Healthy leaders, thriving ministries. That's what we're all about. But we need to do it together. When I was a young boy growing up in Charlotte, my parents took me across the street to the big mall, South Park Mall, one day, a few days before Christmas. They took me to see Santa Claus so I could tell Santa exactly what I wanted for Christmas. So I crawled up in Santa's lap and I told him that I wanted a treehouse. My buddy down the street had a treehouse and I wanted a treehouse. So Santa said, sure. But he asked me first, Kevin, have you been a good boy this year? I lied and said yes. So I went home, told my parents what I wanted for Christmas, what I had told Santa. We had our normal Christmas Eve dinner at a friend's house. I tried to go to sleep that night. I did not do a very good job at it. Woke up the next morning, had a very, very, very long Christmas breakfast, which we seem to do every year before we could open any presents. And finally, we went into my dad's study, where Santa would always leave our presents. I found a Batmobile and a G.I. Joe with a kung fu grip. Opened up all the presents, the $20 bill from Uncle Claude, who I never knew who that was, but he always gave us $20 every year. And I looked for a treehouse, and there was none. But finally, after all the presents had been unwrapped, there was one tiny little box about this big that I opened up, and inside it, there was a clue, the first clue on a treasure hunt that took me all through our house. We went into the laundry room, went into the kitchen, into the den. One of the clues was who has the messiest room in the house, and that was always my sister's room. So I went up into my sister Debbie, into her room, and found another clue. That clue took me into the backyard where I knew there was going to be a tree house, and I ran to the backyard, looked in the woods, and there was no tree house. So puzzled, I walked back up to the driveway and looked at my dad, and he said, look. So finally I looked, and there, down at my feet, was a pile of wood and a hammer and some nails and a saw. I burst into tears. I said, Dad, I wanted a treehouse, not a pile of wood. But with a twinkle in his eye, he looked at me and he said, Kevin, we'll build it together. So for the next 3 months, we took the wood and the saw, the hammer, the nails, and put together a spectacular treehouse in the woods behind our house. We built a trap door and built a slide. It became the place where I hung out for the next several years. My worst Christmas ever turned out to be the Christmas that I will never forget as we built it together. About a year and a half ago, my business partners and I were in Fairfax, Virginia. We realized it was time to sell our company. So we completed an asset sale in March of 2019, and I went to Dad. I said, Dad, let's build it together. So once again, we're building it together. That's been a hallmark of my dad's ministry across the years. It's never been about him. It's always been about the generation that he's raising up as he builds it together with the next generation. So today we're building it together, and I hope that with your prayers and financial support that you'll help us build it together. Healthy leaders, thriving ministries, all for the sake of the gospel. Today on Sunday Extra, Dad's going to explore what it means to be content during this incredible season, the pandemic that we're experiencing. What does it mean to be content? The word content is an adjective, but it's also a verb, and it's also a noun. Very interesting. Are you content? Let's see what the Apostle Paul has to say about being content.
Well, welcome to our home today. I'm here in our house in Charlotte, in this room where I do a lot of my work, meet a lot of people who come here, and where Jeannie and I have been, I started to say stuck. No, we've been secluded, of course, for the last, how many months? March, April, May, June, July, 5 months with this pandemic. We haven't gone up much. Most of our time by far has been here. And so I've been thinking a lot about contentment. What does it mean to be content at the time of COVID? Is there any good that can come out of this pandemic that we're all going through? I have a friend in Seattle. He's a lawyer, was for many years head of one of our student Christian ministries. And Alec went through a very, very serious cancer, a life-threatening cancer, one that many people don't survive. He's written a book, by the way, called Bonus Time, about living after that. But during that time, he had to be in isolation. 4 months because of a bone marrow transplant in the hospital. After that, when he was home, quasi-quarantine for another 8 months. While he was in the hospital, only his wife could come and visit him. So he understands what it's like to live in isolation. And so we did a lot of talking about what it means to be content in a time like this. We face it as a family, as probably you or some families you know have. Jeannie and I have been here together a lot. She has a hearing problem, as her brother did, a little bit of a voice problem. And so isolation isn't easy for her. Our granddaughter, who's working in Seattle for Microsoft, they told everybody to go home, so she went to her folks' place up in the mountains here, and really for 4 months lived without friends, almost by herself. And so it's been. Neil, my son's father-in-law, retired Baptist pastor, Neil's wife Betty died. You may have seen him on this Sunday Extra. She died on March 9th, a Monday. Wednesday, 2 days later, their retirement home shut down for 2 months at least. He was there only with their doggie, alone. I don't know what isolation you've been going through, but it does make me say, what does it mean to be isolated? What does our faith mean at a time like this? Billy Graham had a very great friend. He was also my friend, John Stott. John was an outstanding preacher and scholar and leader, respected throughout the world, from his headquarters, his church in London, where he only had a very tiny little flat he lived in, enough for a bed and a hot plate, really. When he retired, he was in a retirement home for pastors, not in good health, and one of his former assistants came by to see him and said, "Well, John, are you happy?" And John Stott thought a moment, and then he said, "No, I'm not happy, but I am learning to be content. I'm learning to be content." When I heard that, of course, it took me back to where those words come from. But I'd like to share with you from Paul's letter to the Philippians. You probably remember this because these are quite famous, often quoted words. He was in prison on his way to Rome, and he wrote to his fellow believers who had sent a kind of a care package to him in prison, and he said, "Thank you for remembering me." And then he went on to talk about what it has meant for him to go through this experience. He said, "I'm not writing to you because I'm in need, because I have learned to be content with whatever I have. I've learned to be content. I know what it is to have little. I know what it is to have plenty. In any and all circumstances, I have learned the secret of being well fed or going hungry or having plenty and of being in need." Now, think about this. Here was this apostle of Jesus. He was in prison. He was in shackles. Guards were watching over him probably 24 hours a day. He didn't have much to eat except for maybe the few things his fellow believers sent to him. He was on his way to Rome for trial, and he knew the end might be there for him. And yet he could write these words, "I have learned to be content." How could he have imagined from that little cell that 2,000 years later, you and I would be reading and listening to those words that he wrote? Amazing. And saying, what's the secret that you learned, Paul? Very, very important, isn't it? So as I think about those words of Paul, and I'll come back to them in a minute, I want to kind of open up this idea of what contentment is and isn't. Why are we so often discontent in our world? What are we, because of what we're deprived of, perhaps? Why? I think some of it is sort of the culture of rising expectations, of always wanting to do more, everything, more time, more money, more trips, more excitement, more everything. And when that stops and closes in, it's very easy to be discontent. I think, for example, another friend of mine, Andy Crouch, a writer, who tells about being invited to a conference, a pretty high level of conference in Colorado at Aspen. He said they gave me this room, wonderful room in this Ritz-Carlton hotel. He said, I'd never been in such a luxurious place. He said, I was so happy to have this. That's good. He said, I felt good about it. I could take a lot of this. Then he said, I went out for a walk up the hill. And he said, above the hotel were condominiums, private condominiums, where they had 2, 3, and 4 rooms. And I thought, ooh, that's even better. I only have 1 room. They've got 3 or 4 rooms up here. Wish I had that. Then he said, I kept on going up the hill. At the top was this big palatial kind of private house. Ooh, he said, what would it be like to be up there? You see the rising expectations. It always has to be more. And maybe that's something what Paul had in mind when he said, I have learned to be content. Here's another translation. This is from what's called the New English Bible, and I like this. Again, here's what Paul writes. So listen to these words once more as he writes to his fellow believers. And he said this, your care for me has blossomed afresh. You did care about me before. You just didn't have the opportunity. And then they'd sent that care package. And then he says, not that I'm alluding to want, for I have learned, now here's the translation, I have learned to find resources in myself, whatever my circumstances. See, it's an interesting word. If you go back to the original meaning of contentment, it means what you might say self-sufficient. But not in the sense of, hey, I don't need anybody else or anything. I've got everything I need. No. In the sense that my contentment does not depend on external circumstances. It's the resources I have within. I have learned to find resources in myself, whatever my circumstances. And then he describes those circumstances. I know what it is to be brought low. I know what it is to have plenty. I've been very thoroughly initiated into the human lot with all of its ups and downs, fullness and hunger, plenty and want. I have learned to find resources in myself that don't depend on being up or down. Ooh, have I learned to find resources in myself? Have you during this pandemic when there's so much that we can't do? And it's interesting. I've always thought when I've heard when I've read Paul's words, I've learned to be content. I thought it meant when we're struggling. He said, no, even when I'm on top, not just at the bottom, when I have a lot, can I be content? Or am I like the rich farmer Jesus told about, who said, hey, I'm going to put up bigger barns and have bigger results and bigger crops and more money. And Jesus said, you're a fool. Am I satisfied to be content with what I have or when I don't have it? That's what Paul is saying. Whatever my circumstances, brought low or to have plenty. So contentment is to find those inner resources. And notice that twice he says, I have learned this. I have learned to find resources in myself. Then he says again, I have learned how to live through this. It's not an instant thing. Even Paul had to learn. You know, Paul wasn't a passive person. He was full of ambition. He was ambitious before he met Christ. He was even out to persecute Christians. He wrote and said, there was no one as zealous as I was of my own religion as a faithful Jew. And then after he met Christ, he was still ambitious. You remember he wrote the Romans and said, I have the ambition to preach Christ where he's not known. He had a driving force within him. He was a type A person in that way. It must not have been easy for him there in his cell with not much food, not much plan for the future, not knowing what's going to happen, his own kind of pandemic. He had to learn to be content. And that word learned is also an interesting word. Its usage way back in those ages was used of secret societies, some of the mystery cults that were around the Mediterranean, where people had to be initiated, like you might be initiated into a fraternity or a secret society. There was something you had to go through to become part of it. So Paul was saying, to be part of the company of the contented, I had to learn by the things I went through. Tough times, easy times, wins, losses, great results, not much result in my ministry. Being content isn't something that happens just like that. It's something that we learn as God goes with us through it. So I find the resources of myself, whatever my circumstances. And then he says, how does he do this? Because I have strength for anything through him who gives me power. That was the secret. The secret of contentment, him who is in me, who gives me power. Christ was with him, whether at the top or the bottom, whether great days or hard days. That's how he had learned the secret of contentment. And I think that's what perhaps God is most saying to us during this time. Is my spiritual life with God, my life with others, is it dependent on all the wonderful blessings I've had, all the things I can do and I can't do right now? Or is it the fact that Christ is with me? If I'm here, if I'm sitting out there on our porch talking with someone who comes by, it's his strength that makes that possible. I have strength for anything through him who gives me power. Now there's one more sentence, and until I read this recently, I sort of skipped over it. He said, but it was kind of you to share the burden of my troubles. I think sometimes we Christians tend to over-spiritualize. We trust in the Lord, yes. Paul said, I do, but also I'm really glad I have you. I need your prayers. I need the practical help that you sent. We need others. And maybe that's something that God is teaching all of us through this pandemic that we're going through. My friend Alec wrote me something. This is part of what comes from that book he wrote. Alec, the one who was in isolation and had to go through that bone marrow transplant. He writes this. He said, as a flaming extrovert, I'm inclined towards hyperactivities, but I was thrust into a very different life, one of quietness. I found myself, now this is when he was in his illness, but it could apply to right now. I found myself journaling more, praying more, reading more. It could have been a desolate time. I was surprised by how much my sense of the Lord's presence and overall spirituality deepened. And then he says, for a long time, I was always saying, I wish I had more time. I want more time to get things done. But he says, this time was an invitation to a richer spiritual life rather than rushing ahead, a gift of reflection. I think Jeannie and I have found that. I know I have, sitting sometimes just early in the morning with my dog Buddy, right outside this on our porch, just quietly. Jeannie loves the birds. I do too. We have a red bird. We have a yellow finch. We have a hummingbird. I saw them right this morning. We have a rabbit that comes through sometimes. I like to watch the squirrels chasing each other or going through their contortions. That's great for Jeannie, and I've learned to appreciate that even more. Zoom calls, I know Zoom calls can be wearing, but to talk to people, some of the people I've mentored, Peter in Singapore, Stephen down there in Melbourne, Australia, where they had to shut down again, by the way, or Roland over in Germany. To have these friends call, to be able to talk with them, share with them, listen to what's going on in their lives, that fellowship of those who care has been so important to us. Reading Scripture, learn to accept each day as it comes, and knowing that He is there. He's the one who, as I sit there, He's also there. Tell the truth, that happened to me this morning. I woke up early this particular morning, and I was feeling very much that sort of in-between sense, thinking what's gone. We're not going out much anymore, maybe rarely, safely to a restaurant. We don't go to concerts or can't go to a movie or can't go to church. And how long is that going to last? What's going to happen after that? And I was sort of feeling that this morning. And then I opened up to Isaiah, where the Lord says, I have redeemed you, and says, sing. Trees sing. Mountains sing. Sing because God is our Redeemer. And my mind went back to my college days at Wheaton in Illinois, particularly a revival that came one week, and how we would sing together, wonderful grace of Jesus, wonderful grace of Jesus. Those words came back. I looked them up on my iPhone on YouTube, and I sang there this morning. I think Buddy wondered what I was doing. But singing to him, what praise that brought to me. So, the question is, are we going to let the virus win? Or will the love of Christ go viral through us? It's a great opportunity, really. Many of those we mentor in our ministry are saying, I see people interested in the gospel, seeking God as I've never seen it before. That could be happening around here for you and me. We have friends in the neighborhood who've come by who never came down by before. I think they were lonely. They just wanted someone to talk and listen to them. Maybe just to the one that we live with, like Jeannie, loving them where God is putting us. Learn to be content. So I think contentment means learning what we don't need that we can do without. There's a lot we can do without in our lives. And learning what we can do with what we have. I don't know what that'll be for you, but think about it. I have learned to be content, up or down, through Christ's presence within me, through the care I have with others. So you might pray, Lord, I don't like this isolation. I don't like it. Hope it's over. I pray you'll help me to learn contentment in the middle of this and show me how your love through me can touch others. Amen.